I spent almost all my savings, $20,000, to give my family a vacation we all dreamed of. We arrived in Florida, and I was happy to finally do something special for us. But when I told Alex we were going to have a family get-together at the beach, he looked at me coldly and said, "You're old. You don't belong here. Go home." That's when I realized everything I had done, all these years, the sacrifices, the endless work, had been for nothing. And this was just the beginning. I've spent my entire life dedicated to my family. As long as I can remember, I've always worked. Factories, construction, repairs. Time never spared me, but I never complained. I was just happy that I could provide for them, that I could give my son everything I never had. When Alex was little, I spent sleepless nights trying to get in another shift. I knew that my wife and son were home, that they wouldn't lack anything, that they could grow up without worrying about what they ate or what they wore. I missed so much of their lives. I can only remember how often I came home and saw how he was growing up, and I wasn't there. But I was sure it was all for them, for their sake. Every day, it seemed like I was doing all of this for their happiness. I worked, I built for them, and it got harder every year, but I never stopped. There were many times when I didn't take time off, when instead of resting, I just kept working, for the family's benefit. But I didn't want to complain. I didn't want them to know how hard it was for me. My life, it was my work, and I knew that if I did everything right they would say, "Thank you." When Alex turned 18, I told myself, "This is it, the moment when you've done everything. You've earned it." But no victory came easily. After my wife passed, everything changed. I thought I could keep going as I had before, but it wasn't the same anymore. Alex became more distant, and I felt a growing gap between us. It wasn't that we didn't talk, but I couldn't help but notice how he became more and more detached. It seemed like he was living his life, and I was living mine. We never managed to get back what we lost with her. When I finally realized I had some savings, I decided I couldn't just let that time slip away. I wanted to give my son and his family something special that could help us come together again as a family. I wouldn't have much more, but I thought that at least this trip, we could do together. I'd opened an old savings account, counted the money, and realized I could afford a vacation to Florida, $20,000. And I started planning right away. This wasn't just a trip. It was a chance I was hoping for to reconnect with what we once had. I dreamed that maybe Alex would feel like I was still there. Together, as a family, we could spend time again, and maybe he'd begin to appreciate everything I had done for him. When I made the decision to spend all my savings on a vacation, I knew it wouldn't just be a trip. It was a chance. A chance to bring us back together as a family, a chance to restore what had been lost. Alex was grown now, with his own life, his own family, and with every passing year, I felt a widening gap between us. We barely spoke anymore, and I often found myself wondering when was the last time we really had a conversation, not just small talk, but a real exchange. That's why I decided the trip had to be now. I wanted us to feel like a family again. I thought long and hard about how I could make this work. How could I offer something more than just a getaway? How could I make sure that Alex and his family could relax, leave behind their daily struggles? I knew it had to be more than just going somewhere. It had to be something that would let us really enjoy our time together. That's why I picked Florida, a place that could be perfect for a family vacation. I imagined us walking along the beach, sitting in a cafe, talking about old times, laughing, remembering how things used to be. I booked the flights and the hotel. I made sure everything was set up to make it as convenient as possible for everyone, for Alex's kids and his wife too. I also planned some excursions, just in case. I didn't want it to be boring, but I didn't want it to be too much either. I bought little gifts for the grandkids, just small things, so they could feel cared for, so they'd have good memories. Honestly, I could never afford such a trip for myself, but for them, it was important. I thought about how we'd spend the days. In the evenings, we could sit together, eat on the terrace, talk about everything, just like old times when we were all together. I pictured it in my mind as the perfect moment that could piece together everything that had fallen apart over the years. Maybe I was thinking too much about it, but to me, this trip was the most important step. With every passing day, I felt like I wasn't just planning a vacation, I was planning my last attempt to get closer to my son. I knew this would be our chance. The moment that couldn't be recreated if I didn't make it happen now. It could be the time when we could finally talk, not as an adult son and his father who only occasionally meet, but as people who could reconnect. I hoped this trip would bring not just rest, but the restoration of that bond that once existed between us. I imagined us watching the ocean together, laughing, talking about movies, just spending time with each other. I kept thinking to myself, this is my chance to fix what I've missed. Maybe I hadn't said everything I wanted to say over the years, but now I had the chance. The chance for him to feel my care, my love, not through work, not through daily conversations, but through simply being together. That's how I thought about it while planning everything. Not as a vacation, but as an opportunity to reconnect and restore the bond we'd lost. I hoped at least this would work. We arrived. After all this time, the long months of planning, of waiting, the moment had finally come. I watched as Alex, his wife, and the kids happily walked into the hotel room. Everything seemed perfect. I couldn't believe that I was finally here, with them. The moment I had waited for so long was finally here. We went to Florida, and I thought this would be a chance for all of us. We would be together. We would spend time as a family. A dream. The first day felt like a celebration. Everyone happily got ready for the excursions, enjoyed the beach. I watched them, smiling, cherishing every moment. I thought this vacation would give us the chance to return to what we lost. We laughed a lot, saw the sights, and I felt like we were reunited again. But as time went on, something began to change. Alex seemed to be distancing himself. I didn't notice it right away. At first, I thought maybe he was just tired. But the further we went, the more obvious it became that something had changed. I'd suggest simple things like, "Let's go for a walk on the beach." He'd answer that he had other plans. I said nothing, just agreed. He was always busy, but now it felt different. He spent more and more time with the friends we met on the tour and less with me. At family dinners, he barely engaged in conversation. When I asked him how he was doing, how the kids were, his responses were short and distant. I noticed that he wasn't interested in my life, in how I felt. When I'd asked him how he was, how the kids were doing, he would reply, but quickly shift his attention elsewhere. I could see him absorbed in his phone, texting or discussing something with his friends. And the strangest thing was, he wasn't even interested in what was happening around him. He never asked me how I was, what I thought about the trip. The first night, I suggested a family walk along the beach, just to chat and relax. Alex said he'd run into some people and would go with them. I didn't argue. Let him go. But as the days passed, I felt it more, that he wasn't paying attention to me. I didn't want to bring it up, didn't want to make things awkward. I just tried to ignore it, hoping things would get better. But the further into the trip we got, the stronger the feeling became. I didn't want to believe it, but it was hard to shake the growing sense that he was pushing me away. He was busy with his own life, and I was just a bystander, watching it all go by. I sat there, listening to the laughter of his children, watching his wife, and something inside me clenched. I felt like I was being pushed aside, like I was becoming a stranger to him. I don't know, maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe this was all in my head. But I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. And I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to make things worse. I stayed quiet, hoping it would work itself out. But something inside me had already changed. The dinner at the restaurant felt perfect. I tried so hard to make this moment the one that would finally bring us back to the old days, the days when we were a family, when we didn't need to explain how much we meant to each other. I chose this restaurant with a view of the ocean, set the table, ordered their favorite dishes. I thought that if we spent this evening together, it would be a chance for a fresh start. After the main course, when the conversations had quieted down, I suggested, "How about dessert? I thought we could stay for a little longer talk. After all, it's not every day that we're together." I tried to put a light, sincere request in my voice, hoping he would agree. I just wanted us to be close again, like we used to. But Alex, not even looking at me, leaned back in his chair. His gaze was tired, but there was something more in it than just exhaustion. I felt the coldness. He said, "Dad, let's not do this. We're going to take the kids for a walk along the boardwalk. You, go back to the room, rest. You're not really keeping up with us anyway." I froze, not knowing what to say. Everything I had tried to do, all the effort, to him, it meant nothing. He didn't even try to hide his detachment. "You're old, Dad. You can't keep up. You don't belong here. Just rest in your room. We don't need you to be part of this." His words hit like a lightning strike. Not because they were unexpected, but because they were so brutally honest. I felt like the ground had fallen away beneath me. I tried to respond, but no words came out. He turned back to his wife and kids, completely ignoring me. I sat there, hands clenched, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to surface. My chest tightened with pain. It felt like a slap to the face. Everything I had done for him, all the years of effort and sacrifice for this family, now seemed completely useless. All my love, all my hard work, had just been dismissed. I stood up, not saying a word, and headed for the door. The noise in the restaurant seemed distant, as if I was in a vacuum, with only the echo of his words. "You're not needed here. We're not on the same path." I walked outside, but I didn't know where I was going or why. I couldn't understand how this had happened. I still felt the sting of his words in my mind. My own son had told me I wasn't needed. He didn't want me around anymore. It wasn't just coldness, it was betrayal. I walked down the street, struggling to hold back the feeling of my heart shattering, the sense that I had lost him. Lost him forever. After that devastating evening at the restaurant, I was left alone in my room. Everything that had happened seemed to flash before my eyes, but I didn't feel anger. No, I wasn't capable of that. Instead, there was something else, emptiness. Alex didn't just turn away from me, he erased me from his life, and I realized I could no longer stay in his world. If he didn't want me there, I wouldn't force myself into it. At that moment, I decided, if Alex couldn't appreciate everything I did for him, if he thought I was nothing, then I wouldn't give him what he believed was his right. My revenge wouldn't be loud and dramatic. It would be cold, calculated, and deliberate. I wouldn't respond to his calls anymore. I wouldn't engage with him, and I would stop supporting him financially. I stopped picking up his calls, ignored his requests, and became invisible to him. If he thought I would always be around to help, he was sorely mistaken. He wasn't worth any more of my attention. Every word I'd ever said to help him, every bit of energy I had spent for him, now seemed pointless. He had turned away from me, and I wasn't going to tolerate it. I was no longer a part of his life. And then the will. I couldn't allow myself to continue supporting him, feeding his sense of entitlement. He always thought he deserved everything I had, but now, in this moment, I realized, no, he didn't. I rewrote the will and removed him from the list of heirs. Instead, I decided to give most of my fortune to charity. Let my money go to those who truly need it. To causes that can actually make the world a little bit better. I didn't tell him about it. Why? Because Alex wouldn't even notice as it all disappears. He wouldn't understand that he lost everything he thought was his right. He won't realize it until it's too late. I did it all quietly, with determination. I didn't hesitate. It was clear, and I was certain. I didn't need explanations, didn't need to justify myself. I wasn't the father he had known anymore. I was now someone entirely different to him. This wasn't a storm or an emotional outburst. This was a cold, calculated move, and I made it with complete confidence. I understood that I might never be able to restore our relationship, but deep down, I knew I was doing the right thing. He would no longer see himself as the master of my fortune, no longer expect me to always be there to support him. I was ready to let go. My revenge was in the fact that I gave my resources and efforts to those who truly needed them. I was no longer tied to him, either financially nor emotionally. He would lose everything he once thought was his, and he wouldn't even notice until it was too late. I acted without words. I didn't explain, didn't justify. He was a stranger to me now, and that was the only response I had for him. Time passed, and I began to notice how everything in Alex's life started to go wrong. At first, it was small things. He couldn't access the accounts he always used. The money wasn't coming through like it used to. At first, I thought it was a simple mistake, that the system had failed. But the more I tried to figure it out, the more it became clear that the problem was bigger than I had thought. When I contacted the bank and checked the accounts, I was told that access had been restricted. I was shocked. I couldn't understand what was going on. Normally, whenever I needed something, I would just call Dad. Everything was always at hand. But now his support, his money, was off limits. And I didn't know how to react. I tried to find out what had changed, but no one could give me an answer. Something had happened, and it was clearly related to my father. I decided I had to talk to him. I went over to his place, hoping this was just a misunderstanding. Things seemed fine, after all. He had always helped, always supported me. I thought it would be just a small issue that we could work through. But when I got there, I realized this wasn't a simple mistake. This was something far more serious. I tried to stay calm, but I felt a rising panic inside. Dad, what's going on? Why can't I access the accounts? Did you do something with them? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But he just sat there, calm and cold, in a way that was completely unfamiliar to me. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at me. When he finally spoke, I understood right away that this wasn't a mistake. This was his choice. You've ruined everything, Alex. You turned your back on me. Now you'll live with the consequences. I won't be part of your life anymore, and you won't be part of mine. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he say this? How could he speak to me like that? All the years of him supporting me, all the sacrifices he made, and now he was telling me this? I thought we could fix this. But now I realized I had lost him. I had lost everything. It was like a slap in the face. I thought I could fix things, convince him to go back to how it was, but now I realized I had lost more than just money. I had lost his respect. I had lost the bond we once had. And that hit me harder than anything. He didn't even seem to care. He stood there, cold, with no sympathy. He wasn't angry, he wasn't frustrated. He was calm, completely indifferent. You're old, Dad. You can't keep up. You're not needed here. Go back to your room if you want. We're not on the same path anymore. I felt the weight of those words crush me. I didn't know what to say. He had already made up his mind. I was no longer a part of his life, no longer someone he cared about. All those years of thinking he was my priority, and now I was nothing. I wasn't even angry. Just numb. He tried to explain himself, to beg for forgiveness, but it was too late. There were no more chances for me. He wasn't going to get anything from me anymore. I knew he hadn't understood the full extent of what he'd lost. It wasn't just money. It was me, his father. And he didn't even realize it yet. I stood there, watching him, knowing that he would never be the same again. He would never have what he had taken for granted, my support, my presence. And now he would have to live with that, without any help from me. He couldn't undo what had been done. I sat in my chair, as I always do, slightly hunched but with my head straight. My hands rested calmly on my knees. I could feel the silence in the room surround me. It was strange, but everything around me seemed still. When Alex walked in, I already knew what was coming. I didn't expect him to come back, but something inside me told me this moment would come. He stood in front of me, his eyes filled with confusion and anger. But I knew he wasn't here just to talk. He came looking for answers. He didn't understand that everything had already been decided. I didn't rush to speak. I just looked at him, waiting for him to finally realize what he had lost. I hadn't felt anger in a long time, and I wasn't going to shout or argue now. My decision was final. I wasn't going to explain anything. He started talking, but his words felt empty to me. This was the moment when I realized everything we had talked about before was pointless. He still didn't understand how much I had done for him, and how deeply his words had hurt me. He stood before me, trying to find words to bring everything back, but I was ready for this. There was no pain in my voice, no bitterness. Only calm and cold resolve. I don't want to destroy your life, Alex. I just won't participate in it anymore, I said. I knew those words would sound like a verdict to him. He started to argue, as he always did. First, trying to explain that everything wasn't like this, that he hadn't meant it. But those were just words. He still didn't see how much I had given him, and how often he took it for granted. I was no longer ready to be part of his life, to support him, when he didn't appreciate it. I wanted him to learn. I wanted him to finally understand that life wasn't about expectations but about responsibility. It's time for you to learn life without my help, I continued, not letting him interrupt. This wasn't revenge, it was my decision. I wasn't seeking retribution, I just couldn't keep being the person who was always there if he didn't value it. I couldn't keep supporting someone who took me for granted. I didn't want to be a crutch for him anymore. He needed to learn to live on his own. He shifted uncomfortably, his face going from frustration to realization. He was starting to understand, but it was too late. I was no longer the father he could count on. I knew this would be hard for him, but he had to go through it. He didn't understand what I had lost, and he didn't realize the depth of what I was doing. But he would. He would understand it in time. And maybe this was the only way to teach him responsibility, to make him walk this path on his own. He stood there, looking at me, but I didn't say anything more. I wasn't going to wait for his apologies. I wasn't going to fix it. Alex, maybe, didn't realize yet how deep his loss was, but soon he would. When the time came, he'd know. And maybe that was what he needed, a wake-up call. He turned and walked away, but before he left, he cast one last glance at me, a glance full of sorrow and a dawning understanding of what he had lost. The door closed softly behind him, and I remained in my chair, the silence around me profound. I knew that I was no longer the person who was always there. And that was okay. It was time for me to live for myself. I needed to learn to live without him, just as he now had to learn to live without me. I spent all this time living for others. Working, trying, supporting, hoping that at least someone would appreciate it. I raised my son, poured all my energy into him. But as it turned out, many things I took for granted. Me and him, Alex, it seems we just couldn't keep our relationship intact. He thought he could always count on my help, and I was the one who'd never leave him. But at some point, I realized that by doing so, I was only destroying him. And myself, too. When I made the decision, when I finally told myself that I wouldn't support anyone anymore, wouldn't bear responsibility for someone else's choices, I didn't feel bitterness, I felt lightness. I stopped living in the shadows. Yes, I lost a part of my life, I lost certain expectations, but what matters is I didn't lose myself. I became free. And not in a material sense. No, I realized that it's not money, not things, not privileges that make a person. It's the ability to live as I want, not to please or accommodate anyone. I no longer waste time convincing anyone that I deserve attention or respect. I don't ask for gratitude for what I've done for people. I don't need anyone to value my sacrifices. I no longer rely on those who don't appreciate my efforts. I've freed myself from the dependence on others' opinions. I'm not angry at Alex. I'm not trying to destroy his life. I just won't participate in it anymore. I made my decision, and it wasn't about revenge. It was a necessity. I needed to leave him, leave the old life behind, to start a new one. I don't owe anyone to be around if they don't appreciate it. And believe me, this is not condemnation, it's a decision that made me stronger. Now I live for myself. I don't need anyone to justify me or pity me. I'm not waiting for support from those who won't give it. I found peace in no longer being tied to that. It's time to learn to live without the expectations of others. I'm not seeking revenge. I just let go of what was holding me back from being myself. I live how I want. Calmly. Confidently. I value the people who are around. Those who see the real me. And that gives me the strength to move forward. I'm no longer dependent on those who think everything should go by their rules. I've learned to be happy despite everything. I'm no longer weighed down by responsibility toward those who aren't ready to share the effort with you. That doesn't mean I abandoned anyone. It means I learned when enough is enough. Now I'm free. I live for myself. And that's the most important thing.